Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at the new Prydwen tier list for Honkai Star Rail for version 2.6. And there are some very interesting changes on here. I am going to just mainly focus on the changes as opposed to going over every character like I did in the last tier list video, because I don't want to have these go super long if they don't need to. Plus, the changes are really the main ones we gotta talk about. And I've seen a lot of reactions already to this tier list, being very questionable. And I have looked at it, and some things I don't agree with, so we are definitely going to go through that. But before I do that, I want to remind everyone how Prydwen tries to rank these characters, because I do have a criteria section here, and I started up here before showing the actual tier list for this reason. So they do have the criteria listed here, but the main thing I want to highlight is that characters are tested when they are equipped with a level 80 non-limited light cone of either 4-star or 5-star, so that they test characters with multiple light cones. And this includes standard light cones, but it's non-limited is the main thing here. So because it's non-limited, you're not getting your limited 5-stars with their limited light cone. It's not easy or S1 for all those limited 5-stars, it's easy or S0, which is a pretty big distinction once you start seeing where certain characters end up being placed on the tier list. So now that we got that out of the way, let's move to the tier list. And I'm going to do the same thing I did last time, where I'm going to start out with the damage dealer section, just go left to right. And we're going to mainly talk about the changes here. So firstly, we have Acheron being moved down to tier 0.5. And I believe Prydwen's reasoning for this is because Fei Xiao is just kind of built different. Plus also, I think a lot of people when they saw this, they were like, that can't be, right? But it's exactly what I said before with their criteria. They're judging these characters at E0 or S0. So because of that, and I'm sure we all know, Acheron really does need that light cone to have that massive jump in damage. Now she can still perform well without her signature light cone, but the difference between her signature light cone and any other light cone is really big. So because of that, and also the difference between Fei Xiao E0 S1 and Fei Xiao at E0 S0 not being quite as big as Acheron's, this change actually does make sense of what Prydwen does. Now, the thing I don't agree with here, sure, with that criteria, Fei Xiao stays up there, Acheron moves down. I don't agree with Acheron being in the same tier as these two. I feel like she still is, slightly a cut above them. Obviously, her damage isn't the ridiculous numbers you'd see with her signature if you don't have it. But I still don't think that Ratio and Yunli, very solid characters, very good characters, but I think Acheron is still above them considerably enough so that it does feel weird to me for them to be right next to each other like this. But that's pretty much it for Acheron, so let's move down here. Tier 1 is unchanged, but then we get to T1.5, and I got a few things to say about this. So Blade has moved up to 1.5, and Jing Liu has moved down. And just to start out with Blade, I do think that, because another one of Prydwen's methods when it comes to rankings is the amount of people who are using Blade, and I do think that Blade does have his uses for sure. There's better characters, there's definitely worse characters. He's kind of just mid when it comes to being a DPS. So while he did go up to 1.5 just based off of usage and how he's performing, plus he can do well E0 S0 as well, so that's not really a concern there. I think that he probably won't go up anymore, and I can definitely see him moving down as time goes on if we get other DPS characters down the line, which I'm sure we will once we get to the 3.0 versions, and we'll probably see a new form of power creep then. As for Jing Liu, I'm a little baffled by this, because I think if we're talking E0 S0, she can still perform fine. Now, the big thing with her, Imbibiter Lune, a good amount of the damage dealers in this section is that your standard hyper carry, the way we knew it before the 2.0 updates, where we started to dive more into archetypes like follow up, break, all that kind of stuff. Those hyper carry centric characters like Jing Liu, like Imbibiter Lune, they just haven't really gotten that much love, and they don't perform like they used to with the way that content has leveled up since then. So while I can kind of understand Jing Liu coming down on the tier list, if we're talking E0 S0 for this entire tier list for every limited 5-star, why did she go down but not him? That's what I want to know. because, you know, sure, people have their opinions of who they think is better between the two of them. I personally think E0 S0 Jingliu is better by a small margin, but once you get into Eidolons and everything, then I think Imbibed Lune does become better by a pretty wide margin. But I do think that it does. I don't think it makes sense for just her to come down here. But of course, we'll see with what we get in terms of, you know, supports coming up, in terms of upcoming content. We'll see if Jingliu is going to stay here. Maybe she'll go up a tier. I don't think she's going to go past this meta line ever again, probably, unless some crazy support comes out. She did also get a new relic set, so, you know, we'll see what happens for Jingliu. Then we also have Seele going down to tier 2. I think this is just going to continually happen every so often, because as enemies get stronger and stronger and have more HP, it's going to be tough to proc Seele's main mechanic being her resurgence. So this I'm, you know, totally fine with, being down here in a tier with characters like Himeko, Jingyuan, Qingxue. Having them all down here, you know, I think this makes sense. And this set of characters, I mean, maybe not Jingyuan, if they, because Jingyuan has gotten several buffs, I'm sure they'll probably give him more. I could definitely see him either staying here, maybe moving slightly up, but not too much of a change for tier 2 there. And yeah, once again, Seele being moved down a bit absolutely makes sense to me. And I think that's it for this section. Yeah, okay, so that's it for the damage dealers. Let's move on now to the specialist category. And the first character we gotta talk about is Rappa herself, being put into tier 1 for Memory of Chaos. Because I don't think I mentioned it before, but this is specifically Memory of Chaos. And she is also rated pretty highly for Pure Fiction. She's in tier 0. And then for Apocalyptic Shadow, she's in tier 0.5. Not going to go over these lists specifically, just going to focus on MOC. But I think that a lot of people, and myself included, were very confused at her only being tier 1, because from gameplay I've seen and, you know, people testing her out, she performs very well. But when it comes to the way this tier list is made, there's two things that I think contribute to her being T1 the most. The first one being, as I've been saying, this tier list is based on E0 S0, and Rappa's light cone is super broken. Let me actually pull it up real quick so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Her light cone is super broken. So let's see, where is it? Yeah, she gets break effects from it, she gets energy, she gets an action advance as well, so you can do even more per cycle. So because of that, this light cone not being included in this ranking, I think is pretty big for Rappa, especially since for, you know, Air Edition light cones, nothing's going to give you nearly as much of a, you know, increase in her output as her signature. Then the other reason is that right now in you know, the current MOC, we do have the you know, past, present, future boss, and they are notoriously weak to break, especially for break where they're weak to the element, which 2 of the 3 of them are weak to imaginary. So Rappa does perform extremely well there, but when from my understanding at least, and y'all can correct me in the comments, I believe Prydwen does rank the characters based on consistency regardless of the matchup, just like overall, you know, multiple different fights, not just like the current MOC, but just MOC as a whole. So because of that, Rappa could struggle with getting through certain fights because she doesn't have a weakness implant like the other Break DPSs, which, you know, we have Boot Hill in T0.5 and Firefly in T0. So, I mean, we'll have to see how Rappa will progress as, you know, we get more MOC cycles and how she overall feels. She is still very comparable to, you know, Boot Hill and Firefly, just depending on the situation. Then, moving on to T1.5 for Specialists, we have both of our dot queens over here. We have Black Swan and Kafka, and this is purely out of neglect from the developers, because we've been seeing, you know, Break has been getting some solid buffs. Follow-up just is drowning in buffs over here, especially with Fei Xiao and like March and Mose. Dot has not gotten anything since pretty much Black Swan. Like, sure, you know, Robin is an option for Dot, but she's more focused for follow-up. And then we got Jiao Cho, who's not a Dot specific, you know, character. And then we also are having Feud come up as another Nihility, but she might not end up being a Dot, you know, character. Obviously, we don't have anything confirmed, but she might not end up being like a Dot kind of support. So Dot is just super in the dust right now, which really does suck, especially since as the content's getting harder, there's nothing that's really propping Dot up to be a competitive archetype in the game. Now, can it still clear content? Yes. But on the other side of whatever mode you're doing, you're going to need a really strong team to make up for Dot being a little slower. So really, these two just need a dedicated Dot support, and once they have that, they can definitely go back up to T1 at the bare minimum. So now moving down here, T3, this one's going to be a little quick. We have Luca and Shui Yi moving down here for MOC, and this is really just a result of better break characters coming out. Also, in Luca's case, Dot not being that great, and them just not being as used as much. Like now they can obviously get some work done, especially Luca if you have him with that break build. But these two are not really going to be able to compete in comparison to some of these characters we have. Like we have Rappa, we have Boot Hill, Firefly. Those three characters are all very good, whereas these ones are just all right. Even at E6, like they can do some solid break damage and everything. But if you're going to compare these two 4-stars to the limited 5-stars, there's just no competition there. So I definitely see how they move down. And then, I don't even know why this took so long to happen, but Fire MC is down to T5, the lowest tier. Honestly, I feel like this should have happened in 2.2, because like, I remember back in 2.1, people were like, oh, okay, Fire MC could be solid, you know, with Acheron and with Trend. But then we also got Gallagher, and we also got Aventurine in the same version, who are both just better for that sustained kind of role, and also can hold Aventurine, he can hold Trend, and then Gallagher has his debuff as well. So these guys really just haven't been needed for such a long time and haven't even really been good for a while. So this is definitely a very solid place for them. And while I'm down here in Forgotten Ones, I might as well do Yukong first. She needed to be moved down here a long time ago as well. I think probably around 2.0, 2.1, because her main saving grace was that you could run her alongside Imbibe de Lune. But not only has Imbibe de Lune been power crept by multiple DPS characters now, but also because she used to be like a really good support for him because of the imaginary buffs. But now we have, we've had Ting Yun the whole time, but now we also have Sparkle, who we're gonna get to in a second here. But because of that, she doesn't really have a place in a lot of teams just because of how clunky her playstyle is. So I think this is 100% justified for her to be in T5. But now let's move on to the second to last section here. The amplifier characters, and it's one just group of characters that have moved. We have Bronya and Pela being moved up, and then Sparkle being moved down. So starting out with Bronya and Pela, I think that for Bronya, I was kind of noticing this recently, but I feel like the more the game progresses, and if we actually get hypercarry DPSs in Sparkle's case, I think these two are going to end up being very much closer to each other, which we're already seeing in the tier list now. They're in the same tier, just because they have very similar playstyles, just with some slight differences. Like Sparkle has the skill points, Bronya has different multipliers for her stuff and different buffs than Sparkle does. So I do think that because of what they do at their core, they're going to end up being similar in placement in the tier list. But Bronya does have her value with characters that are not crit based, because Sparkle is way more crit based, while Bronya tends to buff damage. Plus, Bronya also has a 100% action advance. So for characters that don't care about the damage, like the attack or like crit buffs at all, like, I mean, Boot Hill can benefit a little bit from the attack, but he doesn't really care about like the crit buffs. You can still run Boot Hill with Bronya for the advance, so you can get his pocket trick shots. So because Bronya is going to have teams like that where you can guarantee the advance, whereas Sparkle has that 50% advance, Bronya is going to see some decent value. And I'm sure we all knew she was going to have a lot of staying power from the early times of the game, where we were like, yeah, Bronya's probably not going to get power crept that much. She has definitely been power crept, as we can see, but she definitely does still have a lot of value. Now for Pela, it's kind of just been a battle between Pela and Silverwolf. But I think the more the game progresses, the more we're kind of straying away from the type of character that Silverwolf is. Because sure, her debuffs are very consistent and very good, but I do think that you're going to overall get more value from a debuffer like this if they are debuffing, multiple enemies. And Pela has AoE defense shred. Plus you can run the Luca light cone to give her extra defense shred on single enemies as well, thus increasing your damage overall. And plus, even though Jiao Cho exists, and I think, Jiao Cho's banner was not super popular, so people are still running Pela on like Acheron comps, to overall boost her damage there as well. So I think, yeah, Pela is probably still going to be relatively, relevant. Definitely in this meta characters kind of section here. I don't know if she'll stay T1, depending on the direction of the game and what ends up happening with future like Nihility releases, but we will have to see on that. Now for Sparkle, kind of a similar like thing with how I was like, Dot is being neglected. Hyper Carry is also pretty much being neglected in terms of the Hyper Carry that we once knew. Now, because the Hyper Carry pre 2.0 was just, oh, you run 1 DPS, you run 2 supports and a sustain, or you run 1 DPS with 3 supports if you have enough investment to do sustainless, and then you just win. And in that meta, Sparkle was queen. She was going super well when she came out to help out characters like a Babur Lune, really anyone who had a bunch of like skill point dependencies. But now that we're in a meta where we do kind of have hyper carry comps, but they're more specialized, right? We have Fei Xiao, who wants to have a lot of follow-up characters around her. We have Acheron, who wants her specifically Nihility characters around her to, get the most out of her traces. We have Firefly, who wants specifically like, break enhancing characters like Ron May and Harmony MC. So because of that, Sparkle is just not seeing as much play and as much value now in comparison to other supports. Like if we look at really all of the main teams, like I was just looking at, all 4 of the supports up here are more valuable on all of those teams than Sparkle could ever be. Now, if once we get to the 3.0 updates, we get some new like hyper carry stuff that's more like what we used to have back in like the 1.0s, then Sparkle can definitely see some increases in value. But with the way the game is going right now, and I don't really think the game's gonna kind of shift from this trajectory, we're gonna keep going with specific archetypes like we have been. So it is a little unfortunate, but I kind of see Sparkle's value either staying where it is, if not decreasing over time. She does have the really good like skill point, generation stuff with her ultimate, but outside of that, I don't really see her having the most value unless they give us a character that can really mesh well with her, and that she would actually be the best for in comparison to characters like Robin and Ron May. Then, that is everything for the amplifiers. Then for the sustain category, to wrap it up here, there are actually no changes, but I think there should have been a change. And I think that changes Fu Xuan. I don't know what she's doing up here, I'm gonna be completely honest with you. Because, like, obviously these two are up here, I absolutely agree with this. Venturine, Huo Huo. But why is Fu Xuan sitting here with Gallagher and Lingsha? Because when we really think about it, Gallagher, he performs really well. And I think Gallagher and Lingsha being together, I agree with. Lingsha's gonna be better in some situations, and I think in terms of damage, like, just herself, she can even, do really well on her own. But Fu Xuan doesn't hold up to what these two can do for, teams. Now, obviously, like, you're not going to get one shot with Fu Xuan. She's still very good at sustaining, but she's not on Gallagher or Lingsha's level. I think if the Fu Xuan gets pushed down, and probably the whole tier list gets pushed down, because I do think Fu Xuan is still better than Luocha by a noticeable margin. I think that's what should happen here for sustains. But yeah, that is overall everything for the tier list. Definitely a very interesting tier list. Obviously, if you don't know the criteria of it being easier S0, it can make you really wonder like what they were thinking. And even with that context, like I can see what they're thinking, but there are things that I don't necessarily agree with, like Fu Xuan being here and Jing Liu going down but not in Babur Lune. But let me know what you all think in the comments down below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.